Hello and welcome back to another episode of the COVID Longhaulers Podcast. We share real stories from those living with long COVID, what they face, how they're coping and surviving. My name is Rush and I'll be your host for this episode. Today our guest is Patrick, a 40-year-old warehouse worker in America. He was first infected with COVID pre-lockdown back in 2020 and then again 2 years later in 2022. Patrick, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me on.
This episode, we're also trying something new. For the first time, we've invited a guest who has never had long COVID. That means Serge gets to be our official voice of the outside world, or maybe our designated naive guy, someone who can ask the questions we long haulers sometimes forget are obvious. He's a 54-year-old business agility consultant and works council member from the Netherlands. Serge, welcome aboard.
Thank you. Nice to be on.
So the usual format still applies here. We're going to talk to Patrick about his story and his experiences with long COVID. But we'll also have Serge here to, as I just said, maybe ask questions that I won't think of because he's not immersed in the long COVID world like the rest of us. So Patrick, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. It's nice out. I just got off work. Today's a good day.
Good. Why don't you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and also your first COVID infection?
All right. Yeah. Like you just said, I'm 40. I work in a warehouse now, but pre-pandemic, I'd been in the video production world. I was living in Vegas and working in video production when I got sick the first time. I've been out here in Ohio for, it'll be 5 years next month. I've been at my current job at the warehouse for about 4. I'm into a lot of gaming stuff. That's how Rush and I first met, through an ultra obscure little text-based war game that we've both been playing off and on for far, far too long. I like to go hiking and stuff, do a little bit of kind of, not like crazy mountain climbing, but sort of small mountain climbing, although that's not something that I've really been able to do as much in recent years. In terms of health and fitness and stuff, before getting sick the first time, I was kind of in that range of like a slightly chubby guy who had a few issues, but was like basically fine. Most of the stuff that I'd had been around kind of having sort of a sensitive stomach. I'd been diagnosed with GERD and had some kind of little bits of digestive trouble there. I'm neurodivergent, which when we come to the part where memory loss and things start showing up in this story is something that's sort of already been a present issue. And so some of those lines get a little bit muddy. But the first time when I got sick, it was right at the very start of the outbreak. It was hard to say the exact point of infection because we were so uncertain about like the incubation period and stuff at that point.
I'm guessing we didn't even have COVID tests at that point.
No, when I initially got sick, it was before lockdown, it was before anything. In February, like just as things were starting to kick off, I traveled to work a convention gig in Boca Raton, and I was flying back through the Miami Fort Lauderdale airport. The same weekend, people were flying in for the Super Bowl. So there were people from all around the world. The place was completely slammed. And after being in the Miami airport, I was in the Chicago airport and in the Las Vegas airport. And then a few days of working out on the casino floor in Las Vegas in a casino covering a sports desk for an upcoming boxing match. So between that stretch, there was a period there for like a week or two where I was just continually in places where people were from all over the place. And it's hard to say like at what exact point in that process I caught it, but somewhere in the midst of that, I got sick. And for me, the initial run was really hard, particularly on my respiratory system. I coughed to the point of tasting blood every single day for about 2 to 3 weeks. My voice for about a month and a half was reduced to basically this is all I could manage. This was my voice for about a month and a half.
Okay. Yeah, I laugh because you're making it sound funny, but it's not a funny thing to go through.
It was rough. I, to this day, 5.5 years later, have still never recovered my full lung capacity. I still get chest pains and chest tightness and shortness of breath. And this is not a respiratory issue, but another chest related issue that has in some ways coincided with this, because it makes things like hiking and more cardio intensive things extra difficult. Is not only do I now have some of these issues around breathing and a sort of recurring cough and more limited lung capacity, but for unrelated reasons, I had an EKG a couple of years before, which had shown that my heartbeat was functioning normally. After my COVID infection, I now have a slightly arrhythmic heartbeat. So it's minor enough that the doctors have said basically that my body is compensating and it's more or less okay, but I can't like strain it too much, you know? And so it's, those things have all sort of compounded in this way where like we all put on some COVID weight, and it's real hard to put that COVID weight back off when you can't like do a lot of the type of exercise that you would do to do that without, you know, finding yourself stopping and clutching your chest in pain and trying to get your breath.
So I'll bring you in here, Serge. Is anything that Patrick's saying surprising to you at this point, or have you heard these stories before?
I think for me, because I was making some notes, Patrick's remark about the fact that neurodivergence and COVID, if I understand it correctly, have some similarities in their effects, or maybe the symptoms or something?
Well, okay, that was maybe a slightly muddy statement for me to make. Let me clarify that a little bit. The second time I got sick, at that point I was working in the warehouse here, and the company was providing us with COVID tests that you could take home, so that if you felt like you were maybe coming down with something, you could test yourself right away and avoid coming in any more than necessary. And what people thought was a summer cold was going through the building, and it turned out that the COVID tests that we had been provided with were all faulty and would all come back negative no matter whether you had it or not. So people were coming into work with COVID, giving each other COVID, thinking that it was just like a cold or flu or something that was being passed around, and going, well, there's only so many sick days I can stay home and stuff for that, thinking that it would, be okay that it wasn't COVID because they had taken a test. And after that one, it was a much milder infection. I'd already been vaccinated at that point, but in the after effects of that is where a lot of the kind of hazy, I know you said in a previous podcast, you don't love the term brain fog, but since that's the term people use, the brain fog and the memory loss and stuff really started kicking in following that one, as well as a real ramping up of some of my pre-existing digestive issues. And kind of what I was getting at with the neurodivergence thing was, I've always had certain like weird memory issues and spacing out in certain ways, where like this was just a case when these sort of after effects started coming up in the second infection. When I started having these kind of like weird moments of just completely losing track of where I was, forgetting mid-sentence what I was talking about when I started the sentence, just sort of drifting around in rooms, kind of being like, where am I? What? It was a sort of ramping up of related issues that I had already. So it makes the lines a little fuzzy as to like what was already just kind of me having my own things, and what was like the new amplified levels of that as a result of the after effects of long COVID.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's interesting to use the word amplifying there, because those issues the brain fog stuff is quite common for people who suffer from long COVID, but one of COVID's, I guess, personality traits, if you want to put it that way, is that it can target pre-existing issues that you have, maybe that you weren't even aware of, and turn the dial up on those. So it could be that it found those pre-existing issues with Patrick and turned those up to 11, but it could also just be brain fog is just one of the common features of long COVID.
Yeah. And that also makes it apparently hard to diagnose, hard to recognize, because the symptoms could be very diverse, right?
Yeah, absolutely. There is correlation as well between people who have neurodivergence and their incidence of long COVID. And nobody quite understands why, but people who are neurodivergent are more vulnerable to contracting long COVID.
It may be tied to what you just said about how it finds particular issues that you have and sort of amplifies, turns those up, because the other big thing with that one was the digestive stuff, which, like I said, that's an area that I've already had. I'd already had a GERD diagnosis before. I've already had nausea problems going back to when I was a kid. It just took this kind of like recurring thing that I've had some issues with and brought it to a point where for several months I was waking up and hovering over the toilet to see whether I would vomit, and it was 50-50 whether I would, like almost every day. And that's different than having some occasional nausea issues.
Yeah.
Yeah, big time.
Yeah. And for me to really ramp up the naivete scale, I was thinking about it, but actually, if I look at in the media and the way we talk about COVID nowadays, it's sort of treated as more of something like a turbo flu. So, people can get it, you get a little bit sick. But the way we talk about it is sort of like a sort of a more dangerous flu. And I realize I don't actually know what the latest status of it is. I know we first thought it was a respiratory disease, and it turned out to be something with blood. But I don't know, what's the current state of it really? Do we already know sort of what the core thing is?
This is perfect why I brought you on the podcast, Serge, because you've touched on something that is absolutely correct. You are right in what you just said. And it's something I know quite a lot about because I've been, like I say, immersed in the world for quite a while. You're right when you say that it is a respiratory disease. It's still a respiratory disease. COVID in the acute phase, which is when you've got the infection, is considered a respiratory disease. And Patrick told us all about, like, the earlier version of COVID was much harder on the respiratory phase than the current variant, which is a lot milder by comparison to those early days. But the long COVID phase of the virus is not a respiratory disease. It moves past that. So if you get COVID, you get the respiratory disease. Most people just get better and don't get long COVID. A certain percentage of people will then go on to develop long COVID, and that is considered to be a circulatory disease. You mentioned the blood. Yes, it's a circulatory disease in the long COVID phase, so it's attacking your entire circulatory system, your blood vessels. Patrick mentioned he had issues with his heart. That's the long COVID phase kicking in.
Okay, and because blood is so fundamental to your body, it can surface in many ways, I guess.
Yeah,
I mean, it's widespread damage across your entire body once it becomes a circulatory disease.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and if, like me, you did like actual physical damage during the respiratory disease part because it was severe enough, now you're not only are you having issues with your blood flow, you're also having issues with the oxygen that's supposed to get into the blood in the first place, even getting into your body. So you just have this kind of compounded issue. And so things like feeling, a lack of energy, feeling lethargic, having to be careful about what types of exercise you can do and how intensely you can go about it, and a lot of different things like that sort of crop up as these general soft physical limitations that aren't super apparent until you kind of suddenly hit them, and like your body won't let you do certain things that you could before.
Yeah.
So it sounds like, Patrick, that you didn't really get too many symptoms from your first infection, and it was really your second infection where long COVID kicked in. Am I understanding that right?
Yeah, it's kind of a weird thing where it's sort of two separate sets of issues, where the first one was a very severe illness and some like direct physical damage to my chest, to my heart, to my lungs. The second time around, I had been vaccinated. I got a much milder, it feels like a summer cold type version of the illness. But then spent several months afterward floating around in a haze in that kind of way where like you just feel like a balloon suspended up just kind of above your body, or maybe just up in the air, just kind of floating through the room, half the time only vaguely aware of like who you are and where you're going.
And second phase give you the GERD symptoms, or were they from the first infection?
I had already had digestive problems throughout. And so those have kind of gone up and down, but the real severe acute stuff came really during that second one. And
so that tracks a lot with my experience with long COVID, because I also got the mild version, what felt like a mild infection acutely, and then long COVID just threw me off a cliff.
yeah, the memory loss was really bad because, like I said, I already have had some memory issues, but I can ironically remember having conversations where it was really normal for me to start talking and 3 words into a sentence have no idea what I was talking about when I started the sentence, and almost like Chat GPT style, just spit word salad out based on the last word or two I'd heard myself say until I found what I thought maybe I was trying to talk about. So there were a lot of times where I'd start saying something and it would just kind of meander off into some nonsense because I had just completely lost track, like in the span of 2 or 3 words of like what I was trying to say when I'd started the sentence.
So were you still working through this time?
I actually was able to sit home for the first round, but when the second time came around, that I had to work through for the most part. I burned up basically all the vacation days that I could, staying home on days where my stomach was too bad and wouldn't cooperate. And the brain foggy, hazy memory issue days, I just spent a lot of time quadruple checking everything I did.
And you mentioned that you work in a warehouse. Is that quite a physical job?
It's not overly physical, really. It's like you're up and around on your feet. You're kind of pushing around these metal carts that, weigh 20 pounds or whatever. And you have like some of the items that you'll have to pick up. Probably about the heaviest items that we have are in the like 25 or 30 pound range. Most things are pretty small. So like you're up and moving around, you may be going up and down ladders and you're walking around a lot, and you're occasionally handling like mildly heavy things, but it's not like a physically intensive job.
Right. So did you feel that having long COVID made that a lot more difficult to perform, or was it something that you were able to handle because it wasn't so physical?
It really depended on the day. There were some days where you're kind of okay-ish and you're just sort of motoring through your day. And then there are some days where you're like, well, I'm out of sick days now because I've burned up every vacation and sick day I have. So I have to go in no matter how I feel this morning. And I may have to go take a break or two to go vomit. And I'm going to be a little slow. And it's just going to have to be what it is.
Had you communicated any of these issues to your employer? Were they accommodating with the fact that sometimes you had to get up and go vomit, or was it something that you just kept to yourself and managed?
Accommodating in the sense that I never got reprimanded or anything for like taking too many bathroom breaks or anything like that. But I didn't get like short-term leave or anything like that either. So I guess maybe kind of a middle ground there. It's a littler local company that's generally pretty decent to work for, with the exception of the fact that they have, in the 4 years I've worked there, changed our health insurance 4 times, with 2 of those insurers not having any doctors within an hour's drive of where I lived that I could book appointments with. So one of the other things about all of this in the after effects, I was on a union insurance when I got sick initially, but that quickly dropped off because of the points in time where I'd done my last union gig doing production stuff. So then I was uninsured for a while. And then I started at this job and I've had 4 different insurance situations of varying qualities there. So in the time since my initial infection, I've had 6 different insurance situations, which has made any kind of consistent medical input about any of this basically impossible. You get, your occasional a visit with a doctor here, and then 18 months later, a visit with a totally different doctor on some other unrelated thing there. And then you're just sort of like trying to patch this whole thing together yourself and figure out how these threads connect. And I'm not a doctor. I was homeschooled by conservative Christians. I have like a ninth grade science education. I shouldn't be trying to figure out the specifics of my illness. I don't know, but that's kind of the situation you're put in.
Yeah.
That's probably something the rest of the community can relate to, in spite of not having necessarily the same troubles with insurance and consistency that you've had. Is that you have to become your own Dr. House and figure out your own personal situation, because the doctors, especially in the early days, just had no idea what was going on. People were presenting with just such a wide variety of issues that were all over the place. There were some commonalities, but everybody's experience with long COVID is so unique that they couldn't develop like a one-size-fits-all approach to advising people what to do or treating it or really dealing with it in any competent way at all. That's not really a criticism of the medical community. It's just the situation we all found ourselves in.
Yeah.
But it can be really hard and really stressful to try and have to figure all that stuff out yourself, especially when you're probably at one of the lowest points in your life dealing with all these health issues that are confusing and frightening, and now suddenly you've got to start doing research and figuring out science and reading medical journals and things like that,
Yeah, and here's an area where me being American as opposed to you guys being European maybe comes in. But accompanying that incredible inconsistency of insurance, incredible inconsistency of coverage and input, and real lack of much tangible other than getting various procedures where you're told, I don't know, seems fine. Like I got the endoscopy and colonoscopy and stuff at the point when the digestive things were really at their worst, and was basically told, I don't know, it seems okay. Are you stressed? Could be stress.
Yep.
And it was like, well, sure, I'm stressed. Who's not stressed? But stress doesn't make me wake up and vomit every morning for months on end. That's not a normal reaction to stress. But what I was going to say is, linking into all of that is, despite all of that, I still have thousands of dollars in medical debt from this patchwork lack of coverage.
So how does that work then? Because you said did you not have coverage through your work despite changing insurance providers multiple times, or were you having to get tests yourself on top of that? What happened there?
Well, broadly, a lot of times in America, when you have health insurance, they'll cover certain procedures, or they'll cover procedures up to a certain point, and then you have like a deductible, or you have an additional amount beyond that you have to pay. So if you got to go in and get a bunch of tests that are kind of expensive, the amount of that the insurance is actually going to cover still leaves you holding the bag for thousands of dollars.
Damn.
So even if you have insurance, and I only went into doctors when I had insurance, you're still left with big chunks of debt, because even having insurance only means that you're partially covered, and you're covered for minor things. And there are a lot of different things that are considered elective that you're not covered for. And who gets to decide what's elective? Well, the insurance company, of course. So the lines around what surgeries and tests and procedures and things are and aren't something that insurance should have to cover can be real in this country.
Yeah. And your experience with test results sounded, from what you alluded to earlier, a bit similar to my own, which is you get all these tests done, you get poked and prodded, you do the invasive examinations or what have you, and at the end of it, some medical professional comes up to you and says, yeah, all your results are normal.
Yeah, and you're left going, okay, well, if I'm fine, then why is it that nothing about me feels fine right now? Why am I exhausted? Because I'm not sleeping well, because I'm not, which incidentally, we were talking about kind of compounding things. In the midst of all of this, and as you're having digestive problems, and as you're not getting as much oxygen, and you're having blood flow issues and stuff, and you're generally feeling tired. I've had sleep problems for a while, but with the extra weight that I've had struggled to put off, I've now developed sleep apnea, which makes all of that worse, and also contributes back into the heart thing again. So you can end up with this sort of like cascade effect / feedback loop where like one thing affects another thing, which affects another thing, and some of those loop back on the first thing and reinforce, and it just like the whole thing starts to collapse, and it just feels like you're sort of falling apart in every way all at once. It's like I'm aching all of the time, and I'm exhausted, and I can't sleep, and I can't breathe, and I can't remember who I am half of the time. It feels like everything just sort of collapsing all at once. What is this? What am I even doing? am I just gonna like fall apart like the car at the end of the Blues Brothers scene, just come crashing, all the pieces fall off of me?
Yeah. Wow. And what I would think about is that if I hear all this, that basically COVID is not so much the, let's say, the physical side of it, but basically the psychological side of having to live with this thing for your whole life, right?
Well, and duration is always is a little hazy because we've only had like 5.5 years to sort of know how long any effect of anything is going to go. For me, at least, the physical stuff from the first infection, like the lung issues, that's been 5.5 years. I've just had that. That's just there now. And it's maybe it improved slightly, but not like substantially. The memory loss, brain fog, digestion problems kind of had an arc of they were tied in with issues that I'd already had. Then they got really bad for a period of a few months. And then they sort of gradually started to kind of subside, taper their way down over time, and eventually kind of settled back into something close to where they were before, maybe a slightly worse version, but still sort of manageable of where they were at. Sort of finding a new normal that's not quite where you were, but something that you can kind of, get your head around and manage.
Yeah. I also have 1 or 2 colleagues who have long COVID because nobody knows if this is going to be, something maybe we find a cure for it at some point, or as things stand now, it's, basically going to be, here's your new normal. This is your life. So how does that impact you?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the impact there's just uncertainty, which like, I don't know, these days, are we not all feeling a little bit of that in a lot of different ways? So it just gets to feed into the general uncertainties that are out there in the world more broadly, just tied into you specifically. I guess it's just sort of another version of all through life, different things happen to you that are going to change the way you are going forward. And some of those things are going to be beneficial and some of those things are not. And we all kind of just have to adjust and move forward with them. It's definitely concerning to think that I, may end up with like some, chronic lung condition that I just never ever recover from. But at the same time, there's really nothing I can do about that now other than just kind of manage what I have. And at the very least, I'm not waking up every day feeling like I need to vomit. I can remember what I was talking about at the start of most sentences. And, generally things have settled into enough of a normal place. I think human beings are very good at adapting to new circumstances. And that even if it's not great, it's like getting old, there's going to be things about your body as you age that, well, that didn't used to hurt. Well, I used to be able to sleep like that without my back wanting to kill me. Well, I used to be able to stand up that fast without getting dizzy. It's just more of that.
Yeah.
Just sort of prematurely.
Mm-hmm.
So I just wanted to come back to something you mentioned earlier there, Serge, which was you've obviously got colleagues who have long COVID, and I think it's probably important just to say that there are subtypes of long COVID. There's no medically recognized official categorization as such, but it's something that we, the community, have learned over the course of years. And from talking to so many different people that have long COVID, we recognize now that there are various subtypes. There's probably the worst one you can get is associated with fatigue. and what's often referred to as PEM, post-exertional malaise. These people that tend to get the fatigue-related symptoms of long COVID have a much longer recovery arc than any of the other subtypes. So perhaps your colleagues, if they've had it for 5 years, have this exhaustion element to their life. That is something that is their new normal. It's something they have to deal with every day. They wake up, they've still got long COVID. It's something they have to battle. Whereas, and speaking to my own experience, for me, I got a different subtype of long COVID. It was a lot similar to the arc that Patrick was just describing with his second experience with the virus, where there was like this acute, horrible phase that maybe lasted, for me, it was about 6 months, where everything was just going haywire. And then gradually it started to taper off and I started to get better. And my subtype was more related to the vagus nerve, which controls all the vital organs in your body and autonomic systems that you don't directly control. Things like digestion and sleep that Patrick also touched on. So that went haywire for 4 to 6 months for me and then started getting back to normal. And my situation now is I don't consider myself to be living with long COVID anymore because my normal is pretty acceptable to me now. I do feel like it lopped a certain percentage off my overall health, getting that virus and getting long COVID, but I also don't feel like I battle it every day anymore to the point where I have to tell people I'm still struggling with long COVID.
Yeah.
So there are distinctions in level and subtype that people get with this virus.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure that what my colleague has is PEM, because he talks about being tired. One of the things I've also noticed about, and I think, I don't know, call it tragedy, but the difficult thing is it's completely invisible otherwise, right? You do not see it, on the outside in whatever shape or form that somebody has that. If somebody has some very obvious thing like, a walking stick or something like that, right? It's obvious that there's something going on.
Yeah, for sure. It's one of the invisible diseases that they talk about.
Yeah. And it's the fact that, and being able to, help each other out and being empathetic to this. And I can imagine if there's not that kind of empathy, it's actually quite hard. In that sense, actually, I do have a similar story in the sense that I am an old burnout patient. I had a burnout for a full year in 2011, which is sort of also in that very invisible / shame category because a lot of people associate it with being a loser.
Yeah, so you probably actually have a pretty good understanding of actually what it's like to have this invisible condition that the rest of society just doesn't recognize, and have to struggle with that and trying to be normal and go about your daily life and work through this almost impossible feeling situation. It sounds like there are some commonalities there that have given you a bit of insight as to what it's probably like for someone with the invisible side of it. What sort of approach do employers in the Netherlands, just out of my own curiosity, have towards COVID and long COVID? And is it well understood there, or is it one of these just get on with it kind of attitudes that we certainly see in the UK and America?
No, definitely not. No, it does differ from an employer to employer, I must say. But in general, there's an understanding of to try to make sure that somebody can work and contribute to the best of their capacity. And also realizing that, pushing beyond that makes no sense, right? You're just going to basically pay more because I think what Patrick just said, right? There's this whole cycle of just getting more and more sick. And there is, in that sense, the Dutch are very practical. Like, you can only work for 70%. Let's work only for 70%. And that's going to be the best you can do. And I'd rather not push you harder because it might become 50. And then, that's to nobody's good end. I think, and I must say our company is a pretty good company. So in our case, it's really the, what's it called? Imposter syndrome. That is actually the bigger issue more than the employer saying shut up and keep working.
It's interesting you bring up imposter syndrome because I was just sitting here thinking about some of the different comments you'd made around sort of shame and apprehension about claiming certain things, and remembering that when Rush invited me on this podcast, I sent him back a message sort of apprehensive about doing it because I have never had a doctor say the words to me, "You have long COVID." That has not happened to me. I have had COVID twice. I've suffered ongoing physical damage from it. The issues from my first infection were 5.5 years ago, and I still have ongoing respiratory problems related to that. But I was very apprehensive to claim long COVID, either as something that I had at one point gone through or as something that I, on some levels, am still dealing with, because I've not gotten that formal diagnosis, which again comes back around to how messy and muddy and complicated it is to diagnose it, and how much that's made even worse if you live in a country that depends on employers for medical insurance and medical input, because then you're left in this wild whims of chance whether you even have insurance or not, and how effective it is can constantly change, kind of a thing. And it leaves you feeling sort of this like imposter state about something that you are physically dealing with, that like, do I have like a right to claim this?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people who have long COVID don't ever get that official diagnosis of long COVID. I know it's important in the US because you need certain things to be stated on your medical record to get the insurance to do certain things for you. But in the UK, most people are covered by the NHS. Even then, you're still not getting officially diagnosed with long COVID. The closest I ever got was a doctor noted on my medical record suspected long COVID. But it was always me going into the GP and saying, I have long COVID, and just telling them that I had it, rather than them assessing my situation and going through the laundry list of symptoms that I have and giving me a diagnosis. You don't need that rubber stamped by a medical professional to know you have long COVID, so there should be no imposter syndrome, in my view.
Yeah, it's just always such an area of apprehension, because like the medical field specifically is so prone to so much bad people doing their own research. And I'm making some real big air quotes around that you can't see because this is an audio. And it's a situation where you're stuck actually having to do your own research, which is normally like the joke you make about somebody telling you that if you put magnets on your head, it'll make your kidneys work right or something,
Yeah, no, I get
it. But now here you're like almost feeling like you're having to, by association, throw yourself into that pool, because now you're someone out here looking around on your own and putting pieces together and doing your own medical detective work, but you're not a doctor.
Yeah, but the thing is, as quite often was the case with long COVID, the people who were going through it knew more about the condition than the actual GPs, who you'd quite often go in and be met with complete ignorance when it came to long COVID. Sure, there were advisories sent around, and they pick stuff up in the news, but for the most part, they knew less than the people who were going in and telling them what was wrong with them in this particular circumstance. It's not the case for most things where we have this whole history that they can draw on and look at cases, over the course of decades or maybe even a century or what have you, with conditions that are well known and well researched. This was all new to everybody, and doctors were really behind the curve on what long COVID could do to people, and really had to take some direction from the people who were going through it if they were a good doctor.
Yeah, and that's such a weird situation to have. It feels so sort of backwards. And again, it makes you worry that you're like, being that tinfoil hat guy. And so it creates this really weird situation where it feels like, I guess, a lot of people probably have, in some version or other, had to become, if not their own authority on the general subject, at the very least, their own authority on what's going on with their body and their situation, and dealing with medical professionals giving them very unhelpful input. And I had thought that a lot of that was just down to my own weird, inconsistent input. It sounds like it's actually a much more common occurrence, regardless of whether or not you can get in to see doctors regularly. You just get sort of a different version of the same lack of guidance. But because it's so unique in that way, it creates all these real apprehension around, doing your own research, but not becoming the type of doing your own research person who argues about vaccines causing autism or something.
Yeah, I'm sure that doctors have encountered people that will have had their own crazy theories, or things that don't make sense, or things that make them raise their eyebrows and go, this person is reading some very strange things online that don't make sense. So it's understandable from a doctor's perspective why they might not listen to every patient that comes in with an ailment and claims it's this, that, or the next thing. They will need to see evidence. But that was the thing with long COVID, is it was very up in the air, and it was the good doctors that did take some direction from you, even if they were humouring you and just professional about it and didn't tell you. That still meant that they were able to listen to what you were going through and try and treat the symptoms you were presenting with. Those were the best doctors I encountered anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then on the other end, you get a doctor who tries to prescribe you an antidepressant because they think that will fix it.
I had that too.
Which I did,
yeah.
which I had happen. Okay, so I guess we both had that experience as well.
Yeah. Yep. I actually declined it because I read that one of the side effects was quite significant gastric issues, and I was already going through that. I'm like, you know what? This antidepressant is going to make me more miserable if I get those side effects. So I erred on the side of caution and avoided it.
Yeah, I declined it more just out of apprehensions for the kind of effects that can happen when you have to go off of an antidepressant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and I think that touches on an important thing with all chronic conditions is the fact that that doesn't define you in your worth, right? I think that there's a lot of, if I hear it also, the way people look at themselves, the way doctors look at you, it's like you're worthless. And just screw that, man. Sort of, you're still you're still the person you are. You still love music. You still, I don't know, play the guitar. You still
I do actually.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I play bass, and we should do a band and have Rush be the drummer or something.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask Patrick, what was your support network like in terms of family and friends? Because we talked about your employer, we talked about your insurance, but what was your support like from the family side?
It's actually perfect timing for you to ask that question, because my boyfriend just left literally 2 seconds ago. So now I'm alone in the house and don't have to worry about saying anything that anyone can overhear.
Oh, the gloves are coming off.
No, actually, he's been great. In terms of my family generally, I alluded earlier to the fact that I was homeschooled by conservative Christians and had a very patchwork science education as a result. And as my recent comment probably also makes clear, I am gay. So there have been bumpy periods in terms of my relationship with my parents. Broadly, we're good. And I don't want to get too much into family things, but when it comes to illness, particularly around COVID, the initial run of the illness, my parents were pretty hard in the, like, how political do we want to get here with the Trump COVID is a made up thing, all that kind of bullshit area. And my parents have always kind of been the types who didn't really trust doctors. We didn't really go to doctors when I was growing up much at all. And have a kind of, rub some dirt on it, take a salt tablet sort of approach to most illness. So I did get some financial support from different family members when I lost my job because it evaporated during the pandemic, and I was also horrifically ill and would have been unable to work even if I'd had a job to go to. So I got some help from some individual people in my life at that point in time. But in terms of like dealing with the illness end of stuff, I really was kind of just on my own to deal with that for the most part. I was not living in the same state as most of my family. I was off on the other side of the country. So I had roommates who were around me who, for the most part, were staying away because they didn't want to also get sick and drag it to other family members and other people and stuff. So I kind of just sat off on my own, coughing and tasting blood during my initial illness. And then in the time since, it's you have different friends. You have my partner, who I actually, after I was no longer employed, after I'd lost my job and the industry had kind of collapsed and everything in 2020, I had been in a long distance relationship for about 2.5 years at that point. My partner lived here in Ohio, which is where I am now. And so I moved cross country to be here with him. And so in terms of helping me get up on my feet again and stuff and providing like a stable financial base and everything, he really handled a lot of that. I did some little odd job stuff around to make a little bit of money, but I didn't get settled into steady employment for like 9 months or so after moving out here. It took a while before I was able to find something. So he's been great. And I've had, certain individual friends and family members who've helped out in certain ways. I don't know. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we don't have to get too into the weeds of it.
Yeah, well, and I mean, ultimately, like, my parents both did get COVID eventually, and both like are now aware that it is a real thing, and have heard the different issues that I've had, in retrospect. And so that's, I guess, validating in its own way, but not great, because who wants validation that means your parents got COVID? That's not good.
No.
So it's, yeah, I don't know. I guess that topic is a little messy, and I feel like I'm painting my family in a really negative light. Like, broadly speaking, my parents have always, been very clear about loving their kids and wanting to help us and things. Like I feel like I'm making out like there's some kind of like, weird hillbilly monsters or something, and I don't want to paint that image, but it's complicated. It's just some things are complicated.
No, for the record, I don't think you painted them like that at all. And I guess sort of moving forward a little bit, how are you doing today? Do you feel like you're probably better, or at least able to move forward? Do you still have apprehensions about getting COVID again? What's the sort of day-to-day life like?
Well, in terms of whether I still have it or not, I mean, I guess that's sort of a hazy question, like, what of the things that affected you from COVID means still having long COVID? Because if the damage to my lungs and having an arrhythmic heartbeat are things that count as long COVID because COVID caused them, then those are things that I still have, and presumably I'm going to continue to have for years going forward. So if that, counts, then I guess I still have long COVID. But if we're talking about the hazy brain fog issues, the memory issues, the horrible digestive problems, that kind of package of more familiar long COVID set of symptoms, I would broadly say that my arc and yours were not like wildly dissimilar in terms of the time frame of 6-ish months of just feeling like absolute garbage in every possible way, and then just sort of a gradual improvement of different things. I've honed in more on what kind of exercises I can do and stuff, and I've gotten my weight a little more under control than where it was. But like, for perspective on that, when I initially got COVID, I think I weighed about 250 or 260 pounds. I'm just under 6 feet tall, which means I'm the same height as a lot of guys who claim to be out 6'1", and I've got kind of a large frame. So on me, 250 or 260 is like pudgy, definitely overweight, but not like, notably really fat. I got up to 307 pounds after COVID, when I kind of really got into this like really sedentary space where I wasn't doing any exercise, because anytime I tried to get up and do anything, my chest would hurt. And I just kind of gradually put on this weight that was difficult to get off. And I've now honed in more on, okay, I can do more strength training things and like weightlifting type stuff, and I can, lose weight and burn calories more that way. And I've gotten myself down to like 270 now. And that kind of a trajectory, you can sort of map onto all my health across the board, of sort of like, I had some issues, but was basically fine. Things got pretty bad for a while, and now they're kind of back under control, maybe a little bit worse than they were. But also, I'm older than I was, and I'm heavier than I was, and the body sort of decays over time a little bit anyway. So how much of that is the lingering after effects of COVID? How much of that is just natural progression of time? It's hard to say, but the like prominent issues that make you feel like, okay, I am struggling through long COVID have sort of tapered off and gone away on that front. The lingering things being the chest stuff that I've talked about.
Yeah, we'll get into this in a second. There is an official definition for what constitutes long COVID, but for me personally, it was when I stopped struggling every day and my life sort of hit this level where I was like, okay, this is an acceptable way to live for me. I'm not suffering all of the time. That for me was when I started talking about having long COVID less, and as that got better and better, I eventually felt like maybe it's imposter syndrome, I don't know, but I don't really feel like I can say I have long COVID anymore when I feel like my day-to-day life is okay. But the actual definition of long COVID is any symptoms that persist more than 3 months beyond having the actual acute infection. And if you're saying things like, it's permanently damaged your lungs and your heart to the point where you are having an arrhythmia, you said, then that is a persistent symptom that has persisted long after the virus's acute phase, to the point where you could say quite factually that you still have long COVID. But I think ultimately it comes down to whether or not you think you're struggling day to day with long COVID, whether or not you want to put that diagnosis on yourself.
Yeah, and I think I tend instead to frame it as I have suffered long-term damage from COVID.
I think you and I have the same mindset on that, to be honest.
Like you said, I'm sort of in that place of like my day-to-day life, I'm basically fine. I've gotten myself back into better levels of physical shape than I was. I'm not waking up every morning feeling like I got to vomit. Like I said, I can remember what I was intending to say at the start of a sentence by the time I get halfway through, and that's great. So like, yeah, in terms of daily life, I'm doing basically fine at this point, with the exception of the fact that I just can't do as like strenuous of hiking as I used to.
Is there anything else that you want to mention, or Serge, is there any questions you want to talk to Patrick about before we move on to this final section?
No, I think if the little things I was writing down here, I think also I wrote down a note of the luxury to not think about it. Like, I'm good now. So that was the only remark.
Yeah, I feel like when it's not occupying your brain on a day-to-day basis, that's when you're starting to make a recovery.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, so that was the only thing I had written down as a remark.
And just before we move on, Serge, does anything about this conversation surprise or shock you, or are you kind of, because I don't know what your awareness of long COVID was going into this podcast. I just knew that you'd not had COVID, and obviously, if you don't get COVID, you're not going to get long COVID. So I don't really know what your understanding of the virus and how it affects people was when you went into this podcast.
I think, well, for me, sort of the similarities between some other, long haul things struck me, but also the lack of support in the medical community and for insurers and things like that. I was like, wow, that's worse than I thought it was. And how GPs, the level to which they don't understand it, that does worry me. Although my father is a doctor, my stepfather is a doctor as well. They're both retired now, but the remarks they made sometimes in the past is like a lot of people think that what we do is an exact science, and very often we're also guessing at things, and you sort of try and guess based on anamnesis, right? That's the thing that they call, like, you see the symptoms and you try to guess, like, okay, what's going on here? That's much less of an exact science than people expect. So, but still, even then, knowing all that, I'm still like, oh man, yeah, that would be the most shocking thing for me, actually.
Yeah, it's a very unfortunately common experience with people in the long COVID community. And I remember when I had the sort of peak of my symptoms, dealing with the medical community and appointments and talking to doctors and getting tests. It was like having a second job, even though I was at the time not actually working. So it felt like I was still working because I had to manage that side of my life with so much effort and frustration and just bashing your head against a wall. And it sounds like Patrick has had his fair share of that as well.
Yeah, I think the fact that I wasn't able to get into doctors as consistently has meant that I've spent more time just sort of wondering, maybe, because I am not as medically or scientifically literate as either of you two, it doesn't sound like, and I have not had as consistent of access to any kind of doctor's opinion, whether it's helpful or not. So to a certain extent, there's just been a lot of like, I guess this is what's going on. I'm just gonna sort of have to figure out a way to deal with it.
The good news in retrospect, Patrick, is they probably wouldn't have been able to help you with most of the things that you were going through anyway.
Saves you a lot of trouble.
That's what it sounds like.
Yep. Okay, so I've decided to do something a little bit different here, which is a bit of an experiment to try and bring both Patrick and Serge's perspective into, I guess, as someone with long COVID and someone without long COVID. I thought it would be interesting to pose some questions or scenarios here that COVID long haulers experience out in the wild. Some of these are just common examples. Others I pulled from our COVID long haulers support Discord community when I asked for some examples. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some phrases to you, put some questions to you, and get both your reactions from those circumstances, if you will. So the first point comes from Eddie. Eddie says, I told my dental hygienist that I had long COVID as an explanation for why my gum health had gotten worse. And she jumped back from me and asked if I was contagious.
Yeah, my immediate reaction is like, I understand the not knowing enough about a disease to be able to judge that. I'm old enough to live through the AIDS scare. And knowing that somebody currently, if you're HIV positive, that's not an issue anymore. And still, when they shake your hand, it feels uncomfortable. It's a very visceral fear. So,
what was your reaction to that then, Patrick?
Interestingly, actually, I also found myself thinking, this sounds like the way people responded to AIDS patients. This sounds like people scared of a disease that they don't really know anything about and being afraid that they're going to get it as well. Because, as I mentioned earlier, I was really apprehensive about even calling what I had long COVID. It's not a thing that I tend to like claim to people. I tend to say that, I had COVID and it caused XYZ damage. And so I have never personally experienced that reaction because I don't generally say to people, the reason I have this is because I have long COVID.
No, it makes sense. I mean, to me, it just speaks to just a lack of understanding as to what long COVID is, because it's not a contagious disease. It's the long tail of the virus is what they refer to it as. Yeah. It's not communicable between people. And the fact that people don't understand that even now just tells you the level of public ignorance about this condition.
Well, the fact is that just now you actually said it's not contagious. I actually did not know that. I realize now.
No, you can't catch long COVID from people who have long COVID. You have to get COVID itself and develop it on your own. There are some medical theories that long COVID is an ongoing persistent viral infection from viral reservoirs, and there is evidence to suggest that the virus can evade your immune system and hide in cells in your body. So I can understand it, like, potentially some people thinking that could be contagious, but there's currently no evidence to suggest that long COVID is contagious. Okay, so the next point here is from Robin in the community. I told my doctor I have long COVID, and my doctor said, "What's that?"
What?
Well, I feel like even with all of the general lack of medical help we've discussed, that at least the doctors have, well, I don't know if they've been, none of my doctors have said long COVID, so I don't know if they're aware of it or not, I guess, to be honest. I guess I had just assumed they were.
Yeah, you do like to make that assumption of a medical professional, don't you?
A medical professional, like, that doesn't, that's weird. That is weird.
I mean, I feel like we've spent something like 45 minutes of this podcast talking about how unhelpful the medical industry has been, broadly speaking. in this particular area. So this feels like a response that's pretty consistent with that. Just another version of the same complete lack of help.
I feel like Robin might have paid a visit to Dr. Nick from The Simpsons. Okay, this next one is from Jesse. Jesse said, I was buying some produce at a farmer's market, wearing a face mask to protect myself against the wildfire smoke. And the seller said to me, would you like some germs with that?
That sounds very American. I'm sad to say. I mean, maybe this is a bit
Jesse is from
stereotypical.
America, yeah.
Yeah. That also to me sounds very American. I cannot tell you how many dirty looks and weird, you don't have to wear that kind of comments and stuff. Because in 2020, it became a whole giant political issue in this country.
Yeah.
And a big portion of the country made it like a personal political stance to not wear a mask, to not follow any kind of COVID containment protocol. And so in this weird way, it became this thing where if you're on the sort of conservative side of the political spectrum in this country, you may or may not have come around at this point, but there at the very least has for a big chunk of time been this sort of weird impetus to like get angry at people if they're wearing a mask or acknowledging that COVID is real in some physical way around you. So I've definitely had that same kind of experience. Not that exact one. Nobody said that specific phrase to me, but versions of that same kind of thing I've definitely encountered a number of times.
Yeah. One of the things I really respect, countries like Japan, is that actually the reason you wear a face mask is the reverse. Is because you have a cough and you don't want to make other people sick. So you wear a face mask. So whenever you do cough, that you don't spread your own germs. Also, if we look in the Netherlands, when people wear masks, it is generally more interpreted to be, oh, that person has a flu and they don't want to bring that to somebody else. It's still weird because you don't see almost anybody wear a face mask, because the Dutch tend to be more like, people have the flu, it's going to go around, everybody gets sick anyway, so what's the use? So there's a bit of that. But what I would hope is that it gets interpreted as like, no, actually, I'm trying to save you. It's not the other way around. But, having said all that, you will get looked at if you wear a face mask here in the Netherlands. It's just like, oh, that's a bit of a weirdo.
So for me, that's an interesting one because we talked earlier about long COVID being an invisible disease. And this is one of the indicators that somebody might have a vulnerability, is them wearing a face mask, is them taking precautions when they're out in public. And instead of being met with empathy, they are instead met with hostility.
Yeah. I mean,
which is
it's
a great shame, I think.
People have such a visceral fear for getting sick of a disease that is known to not have a cure. That gets...
So do you think the hostility comes from a place of fear rather than a more politically based sort of contempt where they feel like, oh, you're just a sheep believing what people tell you or doing what the government says?
In the Netherlands, yeah.
Okay, that's interesting because I think in the UK context and maybe the American context, it's possibly a mix of both.
Yeah, I think at this point, like, I've seen at work and have used at work masks in the same way that Serge just described of like, if somebody's got something and they're not sure if it's like a flu or it might be something more serious, but they have to come into work anyway, they'll just wear a face mask while they come in. Like I've seen and encountered that a lot. But also where I'm at right now in terms of politics is kind of a little left-wing bubble of a town. So a lot of the general political vibes that you would expect in like small town Ohio don't necessarily apply to the specific place I'm at.
That's interesting. Well, you're at least shielded from a lot of that bollocks. So our next question, or our next point rather, we talked a little bit about post-exertional malaise, PEM, earlier in the podcast, which is a known subtype of long COVID. This is something that Emerson in our community struggles with. It basically means that small amounts of exercise can cause a significantly disproportionate fatigue response that can last for days, weeks, maybe even longer. Emerson's doctor told them, quote, "You should just exercise to recover from the pen."
I'm immediately flashing back to like a 1950s doctor telling someone, what you got to do for that cough is some nice soothing cigarette smoke. Like, you're telling them to do the thing that they can't do and is going to make it worse. That you're telling them, hey, exert yourself. To someone who said, the problem is I can't really exert myself.
Yeah. And is Emerson male or female?
Emerson is non-binary.
Non-binary. Because one of the things
So
it also
they,
made me
them
think,
pronoun.
it made me think about, I see how cis I am, right? I'm an old guy, I'm a Gen Xer. In my experience, it also made me think of how women generally get treated by the medical community. Oh yeah, you're just being emotional, right? Bullshit like that. And my wife had that as well. Like for a long time, she had a back problem, and it turned out to be quite a serious hernia.
Yeah.
And it was sort of diagnosed as sort of a regular back pain. That's something that could have been fixed in 2 months, like took her 2 years of her life to recover from. That's what went flashing through my mind when I heard that, is sort of this doctors not taking it seriously. And the name Emerson sounded female to me. So I was like, I had this flashback of my wife or other women in my life not getting taken seriously. It's like, yeah, just emotional. You're just being emotional, right? So just get a life.
Yeah, there's this tendency to constantly treat women like they're being hysterical or something. And also you really see the sort of systemic neglect that women have in the medical field when you look at areas like cardiovascular disease, where for years research was all or mostly based on men. And like even today, the majority of it's based on men. Like when my grandma had a heart attack, nobody even knew what was going on initially until after she'd been in the hospital for a day or two. Just because all of the warning signs that you're typically given to look for are based off of how these things manifest in men and not how they manifest in women. So sometimes even when there's not like a real intention to ignore a complaint that a woman is making, the simple fact that the entire medical field sort of structurally has these big gaps where there's just a lack of information and a lack of proper research or a lack of proper spreading of information and research around different issues around women's health is really just kind of a major problem in a lot of fields. And it can leave you sort of trying to put together what it is that happened to you in retrospect.
All right. So this one's from Micah. And Micah says, when I tell someone I have long COVID, often they ask me how many vaccines I've had, or if I didn't get vaccinated, or if I have any pre-existing health conditions.
For me, like the first reaction would be that did you get any vaccines? That there is, at least in the Netherlands, there is that judgment sort of in the other direction. Like if you didn't take vaccines, you're a dumbass, so you deserve it. There's a bit of
right.
that. So I don't know. And also the pre-existing conditions, like why would they ask that? Is that
it's a bit? I put that one in deliberately because it is quite ambiguous. I just wanted to see what your reactions were. So it's okay to flounder a little bit on this one.
Yeah, it sounds to me like somebody, like insurance company, trying to get around not wanting to pay for long COVID because they're going to get you on the other stuff.
Right.
Well, what I was going to say is this one I think might be another American, because I feel like the victim blaming thing is not necessarily an American thing. That's just a shitty people thing. But the pre-existing conditions subject specifically seems to be another one of those kind of like political topics that came up a lot, because like when people were dying during the initial wave of the pandemic, the phrase you would hear a lot was comorbidity.
Yeah.
Where it would often be pointed out, oh, well, these people who are dying were already sick from some other thing, as if the fact that someone was old or already had a heart condition made them dying meaningless somehow. Because it was part of this idea that this virus isn't like a real thing. It isn't a real problem. And so, well, if you have problems from it, if it like was worse for you than just a flu, well, it must be because you have some other underlying issue already, and that it's not really about the COVID, which, like, as we've already sort of discussed, if anything, the fact that you have other underlying issues and the COVID amplifies and attacks in those areas, it just means that a lot of people are more vulnerable because of different various things that they already have. It doesn't mean that the COVID didn't do anything to them. So I don't know. It makes me think of a lot of that. I don't know if that's where that specific thing, that specific comment is coming from, but that's what comes to mind to me.
I think you're pretty close, actually.
Yeah, to me, it also sounds like the right side media. It also skews the discussion, right? Because it's sort of here I can point at you because I can blame you for something, and therefore your other problem isn't worth it. I think it dilutes the discussion and turns it away from, no, long COVID is a disease that's worth it. And there's nothing you can point at that that makes it like you're not worthy of treatment for some reason. For me, it sounds like super political.
I think between you've kind of arrived at where Micah's complaint was coming from. They said it was a combination of things. It was people trying to find an explanation to be dismissive towards them. Like it was, you mentioned blame there. It's their own fault. They did something that they shouldn't have done, whether it was get a vaccine or not get a vaccine, or not look after their health properly. Therefore, they can now be othered, and they don't have to think about that person because they did it to themselves. There's an element of that to it, but it's also, we talked about fear earlier as being a reason why people direct hostility or lack of empathy towards other people. It's trying to, Micah said, it was trying to soothe their brain into trying to think that they're not vulnerable to long COVID, even though, of course, everybody is. If you get COVID enough times, eventually you will get long COVID, but most people don't want to believe that.
Yeah, well, it might feel better to feel like, well, okay, if I don't have any of these problems that they had before they got it, then that means that I'll be fine. I think victim blaming, just that runs strong in a lot of different areas. And so there's always an element of that comes up in almost any bad thing that can happen to a person. There's going to be some fractional element of people who are looking at it from the angle of, okay, so what did you do to deserve that? How did you bring this onto yourself?
Yeah.
All right, last but not least, this one isn't from anyone in particular in the community. It's just a very common theme / question that people in the community get throughout their experience with long COVID. So I thought I'd sneak it in at the end here. And that is someone saying to you, it's been years, why aren't you better?
Yeah, the invisibility thing, right? And
it's a blame thing too, isn't it? The sort of accusation in the question, why aren't you better?
Yeah, why aren't you better? Are you faking it? Are you trying to get attention, sympathy, extra time off, whatever thing I think that you're somehow benefiting from by pulling this ploy that I think that you're trying to pull? And we talked earlier a little bit about women not being taken seriously medically. There are a lot of like Crohn's disease type issues that tend to be a little bit more prominent in women that historically have not been taken as seriously. There seems like there's some overlap in that as well, where like people don't take invisible illnesses seriously and people don't take things that affect women frequently seriously.
Yeah.
My personal response, if someone were to ask me that question, would be that, well, if I scarred my lungs, look at the scar tissue on your arm. Is that still there 10 years later? But, everyone has their own arc with that. So that's not the response everyone can give.
So for me, if I get presented all these things one by one in a very obvious long hauler podcast, I'm already primed to sort of listen in this way. And at the same time, as I was listening to the last one, I was like, yeah, but at the same time, not one of these I actually expected as a remark. So I can reason about everything separately, but as a set, it's like, yeah, I did not know that. I did not know that this is the type of remarks that people are confronted with. That is definitely new to me. And because I'm also in the works council in my company, we have, for people who are ill for long term, in our case, we give them the first year 90% of their salary, then 70% of the salary for the second year, and the third year, 85% of the original salary. It just came out the way with the insurance. And now one of the things that...
Wait. It goes up in the third year.
Yes,
Did I
it
understand
does.
that correctly?
It goes up in the third year. Normally, it's 70% across the board, but for a company, and it just so happened sort of to come out that way with the insurances we've bought as a company, and they want to make it 70% across the board. With one of the remarks being, yeah, but if it goes up in the third year, that might be an incentive for people to not want to work. My immediate reaction when I heard it, because we were discussing this thing in the Works Council, is like, dude, like seriously. You know, for me, like everything about this says much more about how you look at people than it says about anybody who's in that situation. And I also think that's sort of the sad thing. And also, I mean, again, you know, don't let anybody define you by the disease. That type of remark tells you everything about how they look at their colleagues, how they look at, you know, people's motivations.
That's a really interesting insight, I think, that those sorts of remarks tell you more about the person than the actual point that they think they're making.
Yeah. I'm a business consultant. I hear a lot of that kind of stuff.
Well, for me, it was like, if that is true, what they said, then wouldn't they look at the second year as being something of a disaster that they need to avoid? Because a 30% cut in your salary is huge.
Yeah.
Right? It's not like you're going to go, well, if I could just survive through this second year, I get 15% cut instead, you know?
Yeah.
I don't think people understand how much time and effort goes into managing a condition that is so debilitating that you can't work. It's, I said earlier, like having a second job, you know? No one would choose to do that over just having a normal life and working. Nobody in their right mind would choose to do that.
Yeah.
But these people don't see it that way. They see it as anybody out to just steal and take and thieve and be layabouts and get paid for it. It's a very unhealthy view to have of your fellow human beings. Patrick, is there anything you'd like to say before we wrap things up?
I don't know. I feel like I more or less expressed everything I had to express at this point.
All right, well, thank you both, Patrick and Serge, for taking the time to guest on this episode and for sharing your experiences and your thoughts. As a reminder, while our discussions do offer medical-related insights, this is not medical advice. Please always consult your healthcare team with any of your medical concerns. If you would like to connect with our Discord community, you'll find a link in the description or show notes of this podcast, along with our Substack and our socials. We aim to release episodes monthly, so please subscribe and stay tuned for future episodes. And until next time, this is the COVID Longhaulers Podcast signing off, and we'll catch you in the next one.